Andrew Hitch, Andrew Hitchcock, and I've been with the department now for about 12 years, overseeing the contracts team. And Taylor Lips is also part of my team, and the two of us facilitate most of the operational type of agreements that the department needs. That's related to grants or consultant agreements, right of entries. We touch a little bit with Public Works on minor and major contracts. But yeah, you'll hear more from me later on today. And go ahead, Sanjay.
Hi everyone, my name is Sanjay Krishnaswamy. I'm the senior budget analyst here in ESD. I've been with the department for about 3 years. Really enjoy being a part of ESD and really excited about this training. This training has a very strong budget aspect of it, as well as contracts and administration. It's kind of a juxtaposition of all those different teams and skill sets. And I'm looking forward to being able to kind of share like what the impacts are of budget for grants, because that's not something that I think we think about a lot of times. And there's a lot of background work that needs to go on that we want you as program staff and administrative staff and support staff to understand and be able to kind of sort through with us as you go about the grant process. So really looking forward to today's training and glad you guys could all be here.
Thanks, guys. With that, let's jump into it. So what is a grant? It is a form of monetary assistance for a specific purpose. Generally, there will be a funder, and we generally seek government grants as a department. Not to say that we wouldn't be open to accepting something from Knight Foundation or another, charitable organization that is doing work that is aligned with our department's goals and objectives. But generally, a funder will say, we are focused on reducing trash load or mitigating unsheltered homelessness impacts or something like that, that might be aligned with what we as a department are in some way working on. And we say, hey, that is a great opportunity to augment or supplement, our existing workload here in ESD. So we are going to look to receive a grant from an external entity to be able to enhance our work. Grants may be in a lump sum, meaning that it is that, we're just going to give you $1 million, go get it done and report on how you have spent that, right? And so we have a couple of agreements where we just get fronted cash like that and told to go spend against it and draw down on it. That is one way in which we sometimes receive money from external entities. Right now we have something similar set up with Valley Water. Or it might be reimbursement based, which is much more common, particularly from the federal government, where they basically say, hey, you're going to have a maximum of $500,000 per year you can go spend on this project, produce quarterly reports for us showing how much you spent, and then we'll pay you back. In which case, there's a lot we need to do to set up systems to be able to have the cash available to front our costs before we get reimbursed, which we'll talk more about today. Some grants require either a monetary or in-kind match. Monetary meaning, of course, that we have dedicated budget of, $200,000 in personnel costs that we're going to also put toward the scope of services in the grant, and we're going to have to track in concert with the additional effort that we're using the, say, federal dollars for. In-kind match sometimes means like, hey, we're going to corral enough volunteer hours that we're going to also report on, or use of city facilities that we're going to be able to put a value on to show that we have additional resource that we've put in that wasn't a strictly budgeted expense. Always grants require some level of reporting, evidence of completion of the scope of services for us to be able to justify receiving the payment. Generally, that's going to be in some form of, budget or financial reporting that we are producing for the grantor. Sometimes they'll require things like pictures of our events if we're doing creek cleanups, or, logs of participants for whatever activities, or testimonials from our partners that we worked with, or whatever else, right? But it's really important that we understand when we go to apply for a grant, what level of reporting or evidence is going to be required of us to be able to actually receive the funds. Next slide, please. I already talked about this, but lump sum again, they give us funds to draw down as we complete the work, reimbursement. We almost always are going to receive these grants. Basically, we're going to front them out of our general fund dollars for the city of San Jose, meaning those funds that we can spend for whatever purpose, not our utility rate funds, because those are generally more specialized and have more levels of approval associated with their use. We will front the costs out of general fund dollars and then get reimbursed into the general fund those costs that we are reporting out on to our granting agency. There's also a note we wanted to make here of many grants that we receive from particularly governmental entities are multi-year. That in itself creates a little bit of a challenge because while we might receive, say, like a $1.6 million grant, that's $400,000 per year in each of 4 years. The grant might be for $1.6 million, but we have to be thinking about that as $400,000 years when we're setting up the budget and tracking mechanisms associated with a grant. So oftentimes, a program manager will come to us and say, we got a $3 million grant. And we're like, cool. Are we trying to recognize all of that right now in this first year if we're currently in fiscal year 25, 26? Well, no, actually, it's a million in each of the next few years. Okay, and that's a different set of budgetary processes that we need to be aware of so that we can effectively support you in setting up all of your reporting infrastructure for your grant. So these are the type of questions that we as the budget team are going to be asking you early on about, so we can help you kind of frame and set up all of your systems on the back end to make sure we can receive the grant accordingly. There's a lot of text on this slide. We meant for this to be one that you could maybe print and keep as a reference. We have a couple of those scattered throughout the presentation, but just to kind of help you think through, your process as you're looking at grants. Oftentimes we kind of get ahead of ourselves, and I know I'm going to do it over the course of today's presentation as I very distinctly try to walk you through these phases, but always starting with identification, going to pre-award, award, post-award, and management, trying not to skip steps along the way. So in identifying an opportunity, these are getting published by our granting agencies in the form of either a notice of funding availability, NOFA, funding opportunity announcement, FOA, sometimes notice of funding opportunity, there's all these acronyms, but basically there is going to be some form of announcement made by the EPA or CalRecycle or some other entity saying we have funding available for this purpose. At that point, we should be reviewing that opportunity for alignment with what our division's goals, objectives, priorities are, and checking in with our leadership team to say, hey, is this something we might be interested in applying for? Because it seems like it might enhance or supplement the work of our team. In which case, that's kind of your first step is figuring out, is this a good fit for us? If so, in pre-award phase, we are getting council approval to apply for the grant. We as a city have some standing approvals to go apply for grants, which we'll talk a little bit more about later in today's training. But most of the time we don't, and we have to get council approval to apply for, negotiate, and execute a grant agreement. Sometimes we have the opportunity when we're applying for grants to do so with an aligned nonprofit. Like we know that we have partners who explicitly work on keeping San Jose's creeks clean. We might apply with them so as to say, hey, this is our intended partner, and we can do that without a competitive process because it's not a guarantee of city funds to an agency without a competitive process. However, if we wait until later to identify our partners, we will need to do a procurement and competitively procure someone. So this is something to keep in mind of if we know we're thinking of doing a project in partnership with nonprofits, that we can apply together and have permission from GO to do it with an aligned nonprofit agency. So after you've got the council approval to go apply, you have to, complete the application itself, which will likely require coordination with not only your leadership, potentially with city attorney's office, with the budget team, maybe, depending on how involved this is. But know that there's some time built into this process of getting the thing sent off and applied for. The awarding agency will review applications and make selections. If we're selected, we will get a notice of award basically saying we're intending to award you this much for this project scope for this amount of time. At which point the hiring manager, or excuse me, the hiring manager, the grant manager and their leadership team will negotiate, the final terms of that agreement. We as the contracts group can assist with that. You're definitely going to need the city attorney's office to review any terms and conditions that the city would be signing off on. You may potentially require a second city council approval if it's a grant of a high enough amount. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Once you know that you are receiving this grant, you're going to want to make sure that the budget team is aware, as we're going to need to set up all of the viz codes, all of the tracking structures of where you're going to receive and expend the money, so that we're able to, set up the reporting structures so that you're able to show how much we have spent, to either draw down on that lump sum or to send in those reports for reimbursement. And, ongoing, it is keeping track of all of the expenses that are eligible for reimbursement under that grant. And then requesting and receiving the payment, at the specified intervals, whether that be monthly, quarterly, annually, depending on, the terms of the grant agreement. So that's the ongoing management piece. And then record retention, which we'll talk about just a tiny bit, but most of these things will fall under either 2, 3, or 4-year record retention standards. So something that we need to be mindful of as we are managing a grant isn't just sending off invoices and getting them paid, but actually keeping a comprehensive file of, hey, what was the work that we did? How much did we receive? What were we reporting on? Just in case, we ever get audited or requests under a PRA or anything else, being able to produce those records. So as you can see, there's a lot that goes with it. And it is a first question of, is it worth it, right? Is it such an amount or such a worthwhile service that it makes sense for us as an organization to be in the business of applying for, receiving, and managing this grant? And so that's a good kind of conversation to have with your leadership around what are those specific areas where we're looking for grant dollars to enhance services, and in what quantity, are we thinking it becomes worth it to us? So that's kind of just a good kind of fundamental first question, knowing that this is everything that follows the point of identifying a grant as an opportunity to expand our services.
And really quickly, just wanted to make clear, the rest of this training is digging into each of these stages, so that you can understand kind of in depth how each of them functions and like what your tasks are at each of these stages. So that's really this is an overview of what we will be covering for the rest of the training.
Really great clarification, Sanjay. Yes, we're going to go into much more detail on all of these things. Just wanted to be absolutely clear that this is the package and the reference slide of here's everything. Here's your table of contents for today. Thank you for that. So in identification, some really key questions for you to be thinking about. Again, coordination with your leadership. Is this in alignment with our department, our work groups, mission, vision, goals, priorities, objectives, whatever you want to call them? But is this something that's actually going to enable us to enhance, expand our workload, right? Something that we feel is worth doing. Some of the most frequent grantors that we receive dollars from as a city and as a department are the EPA and Department of Energy, both at the federal and state level. Pleased to share that we have not seen impacts to our grants from the federal government. There was a lot of concern about that, but generally speaking, we have not seen any adverse impacts to our grants. So we hope that continues to be the case, and encourage you to continue applying for those as we see opportunities that are a good alignment with the department. Another thing to think about, is it going to require other city departments or partnering agencies, entities to participate? If so, what is their capacity to do so? What is their, alignment in doing so? Particularly if it's additional work we're going to be putting on, say, the Parks and Recreation Department, because it's something like, requiring Beautify SJ to be involved in the workload. Is it something that they have capacity to do? Is it in alignment with their work plan priorities, right? That's a preliminary conversation that you need to be having before going to apply for that grant opportunity. is a match required? Is it something where we're going to need to say, hey, we are going to carve out people that are going to be dedicated to this purpose, or we're going to ask for additional budget to be matching to this grant scope of work, right? Not impossible, just something that we do need to think through to understand how we would set up, budgetarily and reporting wise and programmatically to say, yes, we are dedicating additional city resource to making this happen. What are the reporting requirements? This is a big one. I beg everyone to really think through. Is it something where and there's a pretty standard federal form that will show on a next page about, just what were your expenses, send that in quarterly. They've tried to make it more straightforward. I've seen grants where it's like, we want a weekly update with testimonials and pictures, and it's just, it can become a lot. So just really understand what it is that we're committing to when it comes to reporting requirements at the point that you're looking at a grant opportunity. And again, I already alluded to this, but ask yourself the question, is it more work than it's worth? All right. Just going to quickly look at a couple of these slides. This will be what example payment terms might look like in the NOFA, or in the general information and requirements is what that document is sometimes called. It'll say that, this is for a, period of years, and they're broken into 12 months. Oftentimes, for federal grants, it'll be on a October through September cycle, as that is the federal government's fiscal year. So something else to keep in mind, that our fiscal year here is July 1 through June 30th. We have to, keep records in accordance with federal record keeping standards. Things like this are fairly common in what you would see in payment terms. They often will also spell out eligible and ineligible expenses. So things like, staff time is always eligible, various supply costs are usually eligible. But something like, we've had grants that we wanted to use to pay for a new database solution, or, for computers for staff. And the grantor may not have said if technology or database expenses were eligible. It's something that we want to check for the, payment terms, the eligible expenses language that's in the funding opportunity to see, is this really going to enable us to purchase things that we're looking to purchase when it comes to implementing the scope of work that we're wanting to apply for. And I was just saying that there's a pretty standard form that most federal agencies are using at this point. My team of budget analysts is getting more familiar with this. We've seen this a few times. So if we see something like this, it's helpful for us to know that there is a fairly standard and straightforward reporting form when it comes to generating your reports, so that you may just dump in those numbers to the different lines that are being requested. Again, I just ask you to take a preliminary look at if there is an example financial reporting form, just to see like, hey, if it's the standard one, great. If it's something that's much more involved, we'd appreciate an earlier check-in just to say, is this something that we can, line up numbers in alignment with, just because our systems are only so capable. So please just be mindful of these things at the point of identifying and selecting grants that we're going to apply for. Really just, again, making sure you check through, are we eligible to apply for a grant? What are going to be the reporting requirements of us? Reading through the sample grant agreement terms, just to know how frequently we're going to be expected to produce evidence of grant success, what the terms are if we're unable to complete the full scope of services. Do we have the ability to amend it? What are the insurance requirements? Just so you know, the city is a self-insured entity. We do carry a couple of select insurance policies for specialized things, like some of the buildings at our wastewater facility and our fleet vehicles, things like that. But generally speaking, the city is self-insured and produces a declaration of self-insurance. We've run into an issue previously when working with the county, actually, where they said, no, you've got to have X million dollars of, liability insurance for us to grant to you. And we had to have our risk manager talk to their risk manager. And it became a thing because of the city's self-insured status. So this is something that Taylor Lips is an expert on and can help you through, but just another thing to keep in mind at the point of identifying opportunities.
Yeah, and wanted to make one more point on that as well, that like this part of the grants application process is really like a discussion that you're having with your leadership. And saying, hey, this is what I'm seeing. These are the different requirements. Like, do you think, you know, Mr. or Mrs. Supervisor, that this is, worth going forward in. So that's, or with your deputies or whoever, like it really, this is a conversation part that we really want to emphasize, that the research needs to go in, because it's very easy to say, oh, look, DOE's giving us $10 million. Let's go get it. Let's go apply. And then we can jump the gun without really doing our research and our due diligence. And so really we want to ensure that we are having the conversation beforehand. We're really understanding what the implications and impacts of the grant are before we even start the application process.
Thank you for that, Sanjay. And we're going to be jumping in and supporting each other over the course of today's presentation. So Andrew, also, if there's anything I'm missing, especially on the contracts and insurance piece, please feel free to jump in. If not, I'll keep going, and I'm going to be actually transitioning out of my piece of the presentation pretty soon here. But go back for just 1 second, Sanjay, and I'll hand it back to Andrew. But city council action, again, this is making sure that you have the approval to apply is huge. We've had a couple instances where teams didn't know that they needed this. They went off to do it. We got awarded a grant, and then we had to kind of retroactively go back to council and say, hey, we're super sorry we didn't ask, but we want to be receiving this grant. Can we? And generally it's fine, but it's really not a good look for the department to be in that position, particularly if it's something that we ultimately can't do. It potentially could hurt us with the granting agencies, as the city's not a reliable partner. So please just make sure you have your ducks in a row when it comes to having appropriate approvals before going and submitting a grant application. And you will need a council memo and resolution to be able to have permission to apply for grants, which Andrew will go into in just a second. Nicole, I see you have a question.
Yeah, is that for all grants, or is there like a cutoff in terms of the amount?
So you'll see that we have some standing approvals for certain agencies, but generally speaking, yes, for all grants, regardless of amount, you would need to have council memo approving that.
Thank you.
Thank you for asking. Okay. Andrew, I'm going to go.
On to me?
Yeah, I think so.
Awesome. Thanks, Kat.
Thank you.
I'm going to continue and take us through the next 10 slides. At this point, you've reached that identify the opportunities. You've noticed that there's something that you can apply to. You've started to research it. You've realized the level of effort that's involved. Now you're in this pre-award phase. You've been going through a few motions there, and now you're trying to, like, how do I get to actually applying? I haven't actually applied for this grant. I see it. I know what's required. I've had some conversations with each other, but now I need to get it approved. Right, the first bullet that you see at the top is $380,000 is the new city manager's signature authority to sign agreements. Anytime we go for a grant that's over $380,000, you're definitely going to be required to go to council, because the city manager would not be authorized to approve. There's going to be some other unique scenarios that we'll show you in some other slides. But this picture and diagram that we kind of presented on the slide for you is to point out that you have support if you need to go to council. We have an ESD Council Memo Services SharePoint page. Sierra is managing that now. And there is a process if you have to go to council. So don't think that council happens overnight or really quickly. In certain situations, it may be very cumbersome and complex, and it might require multiple committee approvals before you can get to council. So in this situation, we just really wanted to bring to your attention that the council memo process, from just you putting together a request or writing a memo, and then asking for it to get reviewed by leadership, attorney's office and budget office and city manager's office, lots of different layers of review. And then from there, once it's approved, then it actually has to get onto council agenda services. and we have a Brown Act that requires us to post things in advance. And so all of this timeline, it doesn't have any numbers on the screen, but it takes weeks to kind of get your way from the start to the finish of a council memo process. Yeah, and we'll go to the next slide. So this is an example of a city council action request. A request is something similar to a city council memo, but it's much shorter, where you try to keep these things, like, I believe, a couple pages at a minimum. And a short form is well, in this example, what we're doing is we're trying to go to council to request their approval to adopt a resolution. So what is a resolution? A resolution is it's something formal. It's going to be a city council decision, so they're going to approve it. And then it's usually some type of situation that's temporary, special, or administrative in nature. So that's kind of what we're doing right now. We're putting together this city council action request because we want them to approve something for us to do in the future. That's what the resolution is going to state. There's going to say, hey, what do we want to do? And what kind of approvals do we have? It's in really small print, and under the recommendation, item A and B is what we're asking for their approval on. And then if they approve it, then we'll have a resolution that gets created, and there'll be an example on another slide. In this situation, this is the one for our EPA, I believe. Yep. And we put together a short recommendation of what we're doing, and we're asking for city council to allow us for future grants. When we see applications, like, so if we have a big agency like the EPA, and every year they have multiple different grant opportunities that come available, we don't want to go to council every single year for each grant. So we said, hey, maybe we can find a way to bundle some of these things. So we have to bundle it by agency. So in this situation, we're saying, hey, can we have approval through, I think it's 2029, to apply for grants? So when you find these opportunities, it'll fast track you and make your application process smoother and faster by going to city council and adopting a resolution in advance. If you don't do it in advance, then you're going through that lengthy council memo process that I described on that last slide when you're applying, and then that can take time too. So this is we bring in this kind of to your attention, one, because it's a short form, it's a shorter process to get approval through council, and then two, it's a resolution. It's something that well, there'll be another slide showing the resolution. I think the next one, that's just going to allow your life to be so much smoother and easier and more efficient when you need to apply for future opportunities. Let's go to that next one. Well, the resolution is actually coming up after this. So this next slide is new for this year. We added it because we wanted to bring to your attention that we've already gone to council for some granting agencies that you might be familiar with, that you might be managing now, or you might find future funding opportunities with. And if you do find future funding opportunities, and that opportunity is applicable to one of these resolutions, meaning it applies to one of the granting agencies, and there's probably some details in each resolution of what it's about, or what the rules are, or what it really applies to. But if you find a new opportunity and one of these resolutions applies, then you're going to have a big smile on your face, because your application process is going to go a little bit quicker and a little bit smoother. And we have authorities. We've already gotten approved, and our authorities to go with these applications forward. And then sometimes, well, right before you go, I was just going to point out too, is that sometimes you might see multiple resolutions, like you see Cal Recycle on here a few times, you see the Department of Energy on here a few times. So sometimes, depending on what we went to with council and what we requested, the first time with Cal Recycle, we might have requested, you know, A, B, and C, and then all of a sudden D, E, and F showed up. So then we had to go to council again. Or sometimes we do a very specific grant. So sometimes it might just be for one specific type too as well. But that's why you might see sometimes things repeating, and then sometimes they expire. So if we've had resolutions in the past, they're not included on your screenshot today. These are just the ones that we've worked on recently that are current. And go ahead, Sanjay. Now this is, okay, so at the top, this is example city council action specific grant. So what this is a screenshot, not from that short form that we just looked at. This one's more of a screenshot of a section of a city council memo. So if you actually had to do something that was related to a specific grant, in this situation, I believe the grant was a 1.5 million grant. And so that would require council approval. So we had to put together a council memo because it was just for a specific type. And then in this situation, we had to outline different aspects of what's going on in terms of matching funds. So sometimes when we apply for grants, it's not just like, here's a free lump sum of 20,000 and go use it. Sometimes the agency wants to see that there's some sort of matching leverage or matching support. So then that way they know that there's going to be support from them and support from us to be able to meet those project goals for whatever that grant is for. And then the other thing I wanted to point out, I guess I'd point out as well, you can see that this is a multi-year grant. So you have multiple fiscal years in there. And so this is also an excellent thing to do when you have multi-years, is to get everything planned out accordingly ahead of time. If you were to have to do this grant each year, one by one, then that's just more administrative labor for all of us. So in this situation, it was really a great opportunity to get a large sum of money, support it with some matching funds, and then be able to kind of have a longer term 4-year agreement.
And Andrew, I just wanted to jump in on this one, that this is one that I think we did this way mostly because of the match component, as it was leveraging dollars from our department as well as from the Parks and Recreation department. It was also our way of saying, hey, council, you know, we are going to dedicate these dollars and these people to doing these services for this period, thereby getting their buy-in to say that we are okay as an agency to do this and dedicate the people to it, rather than, you know, should these programs come in under fire, or, you know, we're in a general fund budget deficit, these aren't going to be services that we're going to cut, because we have expressly said that we are budgeting and dedicating this match to this program. So there could be some considerations like that when it comes to doing a longer council memo to really say this is the intended scope of work and this is the city's commitment to our grantor that we're going to be doing it. So just another point to bring up with this example.
And I actually have one more point as well. We used this example because it hits like multiple layers of like the types of grants you can run into. So in this example, you have a multi-year grant. In this example, you have a reimbursement grant. And in this example, you have a interdepartmental piece to it, and you have a match piece to it. So in every like category of complexity that could be added to a grant, this grant lived. We actually finished it out last year, thankfully. And but my point is, we're using this example because to show you this is how complicated it could get, right? So like we had to work with other departments. We had to show tracking quarterly to be able to get reimbursements. We had to allocate budget every single year to be able to front those costs because it was reimbursement. We had a match portion. Like there's so many different layers that go into a grant like this. So like off the top of the head, it's like, oh, it's just a $3 million grant. Well, it's like, no, it's actually a $1.5 million grant with a 1.5 matching that goes into interdepartmental that has reimbursement. It's like there's all these different layers. So this goes back to the identifying opportunities portion where it's like, is it really worth the work, for one? And two, if it is, what are the impacts and layers that we're going to have to work through as the city to be able to comply with the grant and make it function.
Yeah, thanks, Sanjay. And I would add, lastly, say that just this is the complexity of this is how it ends up on a council memo. When things start to get a little crazier and whatnot, you're gonna not use that short form that showed up in the original example earlier on. But on to the next one. Next slide. So we're still in the pre-award phase here. You're getting close, but you saw that really awesome opportunity. You figured out how much all this level of effort. We've talked to so many different people to review different things from insurance to contract terms, and oh, we have other departments involved too, and we've been doing so much. Well, finally, now you've gone to council and they approved it. And this is a screenshot of a resolution. All resolutions have a number, like this one is 80099. What's really great is the city stores on the on their database system called Giles all the resolutions and then we also store all the city council memos and the approvals on our agenda services web pages. And so you can always go find these things and they're saved. Sometimes it takes a little bit of a couple quick or a couple of unique types of words, of keywords to look for them. But if you know the number or something, it's going to be real easy and you can pull it up. This is just the top half page of the resolution. And so what it's telling us, I'm just going to kind of read this one to you, is a resolution of the Council of San Jose authorizing the city manager to negotiate and execute a grant agreement and other documents with the EPA. And we are awarded for the term of July 1st, 2021 through June 30th, 2025, with a grant to the city in the amount of 1.5 and a cost to the term of 1.5. And then it allows us to negotiate and execute agreements upon award, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so this document here is, you've gone through this whole process to make your life a little bit smoother during the grant term, because item B there in the middle, it says negotiate and execute agreements. It's starting to give the city manager authority to start doing things even though the dollar amount was exceeding 380,000. So now that we've gone to council, we've asked for permission, council says, go ahead, create the resolution through this period of time. They put all the details into it. It tells us what we're allowed to do and when it ends. It'll tell us if we are allowed to have options. It'll tell us sometimes if we don't. And then this is a document that we might use for approvals later on. So if you ever need to find a resolution, if you ever need to find a council memo, definitely you can reach out. We can help. All of us can probably help you find it. And you can also find it on the Giles yourself. All right, so now we're finally making it to this award phase. We have program staff, and that's all of, well, not necessarily all of you, but if you're someone who's working on a grant and you're going to start to manage it and you're going to be part of the management later on, these are some of the to-dos and some of the things that we'll talk through. So the first one is receive notice of contract award. So what that means is you filled out an application, you worked with our team to get it signed by the city manager or their designee. You applied because the resolution allowed us to apply for the grant. And then let's say the EPA sent you an email and it said, congratulations, this is your contract award. Well, in a lot of situations, you're not done yet. You need to share that item. You need to share that email so we can see what's really going on. Sometimes that document actually is the grant contract. It's not just like you're done, I'm going to send you a check, here it comes. That usually is never the case. We need to finalize some grant agreement terms and get a contract completed. So you did get a signature for the application, but now that we're working on the award and we're working on the grant agreement, we got to get signatures for that. that third bullet says assure that the city and any subcontractors can complete the scope of services. So what you're doing is now that you're receiving the terms and you need to get this signed so we can receive, let's say, that 1.5 million, you also got to kind of start thinking about what's going to happen in the future and who are you going to be working with, whether it's other departments or subcontractors that you might need to hire to complete your scope of services, complete your grant goals. Each grant is going to have a goal that you're receiving funds to do something. How are you going to get that something done? So you got to look through everything. We got to look through the terms and kind of come to terms to make sure that we have all the pieces in place before we sign the grant agreement. It says coordinate with the ESD contracts and procurement team to obtain city attorney and city manager signatures of the grant agreement. So sometimes we don't have to do too much review. We don't have to figure out the subcontractor stuff with the scope. All that stuff's all kind of figured out. So, okay, now what's next? Well, now we just need the attorney to be good. So then that way we can get the city manager to sign. Once again, we don't need council because we got that resolution in place. So once the resolution's there, the city manager goes, oh, great, I'm allowed to sign. So you're going to work with my team so we can help you process that agreement and get it signed by both parties, the city and the grantor. Contact the ESD budget group to create new appropriations and viz codes. This is something that the budget team would love for you to probably do months ahead, multiple months before this slide came up. So back in the pre-award phase or back when you're identifying your opportunities, I'm sure the budget team would love to know, like, what is this opportunity that you're looking at? And what kind of money do you think we're going to get? And what's happening? Because whatever you go and do and whatever you go and get is going to affect your budget team. It's going to affect your budget analyst. And they have to figure out, how does this work with our operating budgets and our adopted budget, and how does this affect the general fund? And it's not as simple as I just said. And so this is a moment in time where hopefully you might have already talked to the budget team, but if you haven't, you're going to come and show them that, hey, we're going to get a contract signed, and when this contract gets signed, I need to set up things so I can spend money.
So I just really wanted to emphasize the point about bringing in the budget group early, because you see that note in italics, this only happens during budget actions. We can't just on a dime set up a new appropriation and new allocation of money for you, particularly if you're doing a general fund reimbursement grant. We're only able to ask for that during a couple of key budget actions, or we need to send up a separate council memo, at which point the budget office will tell us just to wait for the next budget action. But those happen as part of the annual report process, which we just completed, as part of our mid-year cleanup, as part of our year-end cleanup, or as part of our proposed budget. So there's kind of approximately quarterly opportunities to modify the budget, but know that we need to be very conscious of catching one of those opportunities to set up your new appropriation of funds, get the general fund allocated if we're fronting it. And this is something that we're very much concerned about on the back end, because we want to make sure that we have adequate funding available to front your costs. We as a department do not have a lot of general fund dollars, and so we need to be in communication with the budget office early to say, hey, can we have a few more? Can you spot us so that we have enough bandwidth in the department to be able to front the costs of doing the grant agreement? And that we only have opportunity to do a few times during the year. So that's why I'm really emphasizing this point of looping the budget team early, so that we can make sure that you have the money available you need to do your project or do your scope of services.
And I'll be diving into like the why of it all and kind of a part of the technical functionality of like how it rolls out more in my slides. So we will circle back on this for sure.
So what happens too is the contracts and procurement team is aware that you're doing something because you filled out an application and you needed a signature to apply. So my team kind of knows that, we started working with legal, the attorney might know what's going on, you might know what's going on, But then all of a sudden, if no one ever loops budget in until the last minute, then that's when things get a little goofy. And so we want you to kind of touch bases with them as well.
I
And then
see
we
a
can,
question in the chat that I want to address from Sabrina. She says, can you clarify whether council approval is always required for grant applications, or there are cases where the city manager can approve instead? So, council approval is always required. However, what I will say is that we have some of those standing council approvals that say this is already delegated to the city manager or to the department to go ahead and apply. So we showed you that grid of ones that we can apply for. That is already standing council approval until whatever date it expires. So as a department, that's an efficiency we realized, saying, hey, grants from these entities we have standing approval for. So if we know that there are other entities that we as a department want to apply for or are publishing opportunities regularly, we should put forward a resolution or, a council action request like the IWM group did, saying, hey, we want to be able to receive grants from this entity up to, $5 million or any amount, right? Generally speaking, we will get approval for that, which will serve as our standing approval to go for grants from that entity, so that we don't have to go through that first step of asking for the permission to apply for each opportunity. I hope that answered your question, Sabrina.
I think we're 14. So still in this award phase, getting towards these last bullets, it says plan for procuring additional goods and services, via a purchase order process or a consultant procurement process. These are the things that you're looking at your timeline and when you need to complete your goals, and you need to start understanding how long it takes to do these other things, so that way you can implement your goal targets. And then the last bullet says, contact the employee services team regarding recruitment support. So sometimes you might be involving, remind me, Kat, was this with the interns?
So if you're hiring interns or temp use, or if you're getting, overstrength positions to implement your scope of work, you're going to need to talk to Nate and to Phil and say, hey, how quickly can we get in your recruitment priority pipeline? Because we need to hire these positions to implement this scope of work. And generally those guys are pretty good at turning it around quickly, but this also might have a month or two lag time in being able to actually get your recruitment up and work on getting someone hired to do the work. So just another partner you may need to bring in to execute your scope.
Thank you. Yeah, and so this slide is trying to we're getting to wrapping up the award phase. You're going to get all the signatures, and then your contract's going to get executed. It's going to make it into the city clerk's Giles record retention system, just like the resolutions. And once it makes it into the Giles, it's very important that you let the budget team know that it's done, because the budget team can't really do a lot of what they need to do until the contract is signed and executed and in the Giles. So once that step is done, be sure to let them know. Sometimes this step gets missed, and the problem becomes when it's time to make a payment. An invoice comes in, you need to pay a certain amount of money. You go over to fiscal and they say they can't pay it because they haven't been encumbered. And so Sanjay probably will talk a little bit about this later. But so that will be really frustrating for administrative staff, because then they're going to try to go really quickly to try to meet this invoice that came in and try to make the payment on time. But that this award phase is, I think we have one more slide. The next one. This is just another screenshot of a grant award agreement. It's just like the top 1/3 of the first page. Grant agreement awards are usually 2 pages, or they could be 30, 50 pages long. Every agreement is a little different. It depends on the granting agency and where the grant is coming from. But once this is done, this means you can actually start work. So we've been talking today for almost an hour, and a lot of it has just been identifying the opportunities. Where do I find this? And then how do I even apply? We haven't even talked about what we're doing and getting that done. So this is the moment in time where it's like, the race is really starting now, where we can start to look at how can we implement the grant and use the funds that we've been awarded. The last bullet, I think I've said a few times, requires authorized city signatures and execution. So that's back to the city manager's office and the city attorney's office and the grantor. It goes back into the Giles system. And I mentioned before, I mentioned again that the budget office needs it, so they can appropriate and award your money. And yep. So now we're on to what we're calling post-award. So we've talked a lot about different processes, from council memo processes and, executing a contract and a signature process, all these different processes, but there's a bunch more processes. It just keeps going. So now you're trying to figure out, you have a certain amount of money and you need to spend it. And depending on what you're buying, you might work with different, a different team or a different city coworker on helping you, get what you need. So some grants will require you to purchase additional goods and services to complete your scope. So like if you needed to buy a new special trash can lid that just got invented last week or something, and that was part of the grant. A trash can lid is a good, it's a product. So you'd have to identify like what's the grant and what are you trying to do? You need to identify the best process, whether it's a purchase order process, or maybe you need to go hire a consultant. Or maybe in a very rare scenario, maybe it involves construction and you needed to go do something with public works. But that would be very, 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 very rare. So most of the time you might end up with, the purchase order process with our finance team. For purchase orders, you'll work with our ESD office specialists to complete the requisition checklist to hire a contractor. So on our ESD SharePoint page, the fiscal team has a SharePoint page that's all about purchase orders. There is, I think that that's the next slide too, so I'm not gonna talk about it too much, but and then that's a page that you can use to go and look for resources and the flow of what you need to get through to go purchase a product or purchase a service. When you go and you're going to end up buying products or services, it includes getting budget approval, which turns into a requisition. A requisition is something that goes into our FMS system and it goes over, sometimes it's required that you get quotes from a vendor beforehand. And then you might even have, not might, but you will have to create a scope of services and requirements. So like if you're buying a lid, you might have to create a scope or requirements of what that lid looks like or what size it has to be. So if you're going to eventually, if you're going to go out to buy something, you have to put in a lot of effort and a little bit of thinking of what are you trying to buy. So that way a finance buyer can go out and purchase it for you. These last two bullets are about products and services. If you a product or service can, depending on what you're purchasing and like how long it is for and how much money you're spending, it can end up, the purchase can end up in two ways. It can end up as an AC, an awarded contract, which is a type of multi-year agreement, or it could end up in a open purchase order or a purchase order, which is like a single multi-year agreement that's much more simpler with much more specific terms. The awarded contract has more complexity to it. So then it typically has more exhibits. It might have attachments. It might have a lengthier insurance policy. But the OPs and POs is a vehicle that finance uses to try to keep contracts as simple as possible. So a lot of things that the city does ends up on purchase orders.
I just want to jump in and add a little extra clarity here. The OPPO process is almost always used when we're talking about goods. Like if you are going to go buy like trash can lids or some specialized product, sometimes it'll be for minor services. but that process is usually used to purchase a commodity. ACs are generally what we would have as a result of, say, we're going to have a sub-consultant or a partnering agency that we're going to pay out of these dollars. That might be something that you would end up doing a procurement for, which could be run either through the finance group or through Andrew, depending on what the scope is and the complexity is. But just know that ACs more typically are what you see as the awarded contract for a scope that is generally more services related. OPs, POs generally more for if you're purchasing widgets. But it really is the discretion of the finance department. And I'm not going to claim that there's perfect rhyme or reason for it. Just know that there are potential that you're going to end up with these tools, these sub-agreements that you are managing to implement your scope of services.
Yeah, go ahead. Next slide. So the next two slides are some screenshots of two different processes that we just kind of mentioned. The purchase order process, and the next one's going to be the consultant process. We have trainings. ESD has trainings that we put together that we offer for these processes, so that go into more depth of from start to finish. I can't do this all in 60 seconds. I could try. But for you, like in the beginning, when we were in like identifying opportunities, you were spending your time planning and applying in the application. Now that everything's awarded, you're trying to align the grant goals with the goods and services that you need. So in this situation, if you're gonna end up working with finance and purchasing a good or a service, you're going to work with the ESD office. There's a multiple office specialists in our department that can support you. So depending on which division you're in, you can go to the ESD the fiscal SharePoint page, and then you can see who's your assigned office specialist that can support you with this process. And then you're going to have to figure out, go through the steps, which is kind of like that second box where it says ESD PO manager. That's you. There's a whole checklist of things and an approval form. So you're going to go through the steps and all the checklists to make sure everything is there. If you don't complete the checklist, finance won't be able to make the purchase for you. So we've tried to put package everything together for you, so that way you can get over to that third box where it says the word procurement. And then you can see in color, yellow 4 weeks, green minimum 4 weeks, red minimum 8 weeks. Once again, all these processes take time. So you might think that, oh, I could just go buy these trash can lids next week. And the answer is going to be no. It's going to be, you need to put this together. You need to get this approved. It needs to go into the system. Risk management needs to look at insurance before we go out to bid. And that's why there's kind of an approximate or an estimation on how long a purchase order process takes, depending on the dollar amount or of what you're trying to spend. So if it's a $10,000 or less, they're trying to do this in less than a month. They're trying to make this go as fast as possible if you're not spending that much money. But if you are spending between 10 and 140 weeks, or 40 weeks, 10,000 and 140,000, it's going to take at least a month to get this whole process done. And then when you really start spending bigger chunks of money, you might get into bigger, more complex processes, which take 2 months. But the goal here is that last box, which is to get you to a purchase order or to an awarded contract, an AC. So then that way you can actually start to implement some of your grant goals. In this situation, I was saying you were buying lids. So that might be one of your goals. Now that you have your purchase order in place and it's signed by the city and the contractor, you can make the order. You can make the order. They can mail the lids and we can pay for them. And then your question for OPs and OPOs and OPs, I think the term is open purchase order versus purchase order. Purchase order is usually a little bit more direct or more like, and then I think opens are a little bit more like, there's more, it's like a bigger catalog of things to pull from.
It's a subject to change. That's the difference. They're more subject to change, I think. Like you can like adjust them easier, open purchase orders.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't work on purchase
Yeah.
orders too much.
Yeah, it's a fiscal term that allows us to adjust with different levels of authority. So if you look at the encumbrance adjustment form, it'll have kind of the different stipulations for how to adjust open purchase orders versus purchase orders versus ACs. And so that is kind of the distinction, the main distinction for the two types.
Thanks. All right, I think we are on to the next slide. This slide is a screenshot flowchart of the consultant procurement process. This is the process that I run. If you need to hire a consultant, you work with me. I also provide a training that's called Introduction to Consultant Procurement. It's about an hour and a half long, and I take you through the majority of the top 5 box, or all the top 5 boxes, from development, announcement, evaluation, interviews, and award. So I explain all the different steps that are required of you to work with me to get this done. If you have a grant and you need to hire a consultant, let's just add up the weeks at top. You know, you got approximately a month to put the RFP together. 4 weeks it's out and advertised. 2 to 3 weeks to evaluate. Then you have to set up interviews. That takes another 2 to 3 weeks. And then there's a protest period. So you award it. It's not really award. It's more of a notice of award at this point. I'm going to change that word, that last box at the top. But if you do all the math, it's a 3 to 4 month process. So once again, you got that grant contract finally executed and you're ready to go. And then you start to realize, I need to buy lids, and that's going to take 6 weeks. And I need to hire a consultant, and that's going to take 4 months. So you got to start to figure out your alignment. When do you need the lids? Maybe you don't need the lids until you have the consultant. So you have to start to identify which process makes sense to use, and then who are you going to end up working with, and then what's required of you to get it done. I'm not going to dive into all the details of a consultant procurement process. It's very similar to a job interview process where we're hiring an employee, where you're interviewing companies and trying to make the best selection to have someone be successful meeting our goals. So this process takes a while. The purchase order process takes a while. And so if you're working on a grant, if you're managing a grant, you've got to have a good timeline. You need to understand, you know, when things are supposed to happen and what are your expectations? Because in the beginning, we were talking a long time ago about level of effort. Is this worth even doing? This is some of the stuff that you got to think about, because if you get to this step and then you realize you don't have enough time, well, now we're really, you know, we've already worked on all these things, but now we can't get this across the goal. So you kind of have to have this bird's eye view of what does it take to get everything done? What are all these different processes? And then how do I implement things when I'm ready to implement? So both these processes will result in a contract, whether it's a purchase order, an AC, an awarded contract, a consultant procurement agreement. These processes end with another contract that you have to manage with more insurance and more signature processes and all that fun stuff again. And then that contract will be, you know, to do certain things, A, B, C, and D. And you might have multiple contracts, you might have multiple user order. There's pieces in this process. So keep these aware in your timeline as you're trying to think about implementation. And I think I'm turning it over to Sanjay now.
Actually, I'm jumping in for one, and then I'm going to give it back to Sanjay. But thank you, Andrew, for walking us through the different work that's associated with if you have to buy, you know, commodities, any goods, services associated with your grant. You might be working with fiscal, you might be working with Andrew, and there's definitely time, effort, energy associated with that, and planning associated with that. Another thing that might be required of you as part of implementing your grant would be that you need to hire additional staff to do that. So you need to, coordinate with Nate is our employee services program manager. That was formerly the position that I was in the department before I became your AO. You have to get your request in to be prioritized. So your leadership team is who Nate is asking, what are your next recruiting priorities? Make sure your deputy or your division manager is aware, hey, we really need to get our positions hired, which means we need to either get temp U's, which are people who are hired directly temporarily onto city payroll for, unbenefited part-time positions. Or we need to get overstrength positions, meaning positions that are short-term, limited time, not budgeted, but just going to be for the next 2 years while we implement this grant, which means that we need to submit what's called an overstrength request. Here's an example of the top of one, in this clip here for getting an additional inspector so that we can implement an additional scope of work for a short period. This was leading up to asking for a permanent position as part of the next budget process. I'm not going to get into the details of that so much as to say that if we do need additional positions, not during the budget cycle, we have to send in one of these requests to get that position created in the current fiscal year, which in itself can take a few weeks to go through the approvals. Well, you're simultaneously saying, can we get this on the hiring priorities list for our division? A few weeks later, it gets posted. A few weeks later, you're interviewing people. A few weeks after that, you're getting to hire them. So really trying to get out ahead of this process as soon as we know we're getting the grant to request the, overstrength positions or the temp U or whatever staffing you're going to use to get this accomplished. Gives the employee services team their go get started on the work of getting us people so that you have people in place as quickly as possible to execute that scope of services that you're intending to implement as part of the grant. So just another kind of potential complexity and component to be thinking about when it comes to, particularly if you're receiving a larger grant. Some of these that are like $5-10 million have within it that we're going to hire 3 staff. That's something you want to make Nate aware of really early in the process so he can try to time it out accordingly to get you people as quickly as possible. You're also going to want to make your budget analysts aware of that as quickly as possible because it's likely that we're going to ask for limit dated budgeted positions as part of the next budget process to say, hey, we want to fund 2 environmental services specialists for fiscal year 26-27 and 27-28. That's something that we would work with you to write a proposal that says we're going to receive reimbursement for their costs from this grantor. So this is a net zero for the city, which should be approved as a proposal, right? But there's back end work that has to happen to ensure that you will get these positions and hire for them in a timely manner. And again, coordinating with us in the budget group, you're going to want to make the services team is looped in if you are to implement the scope of services of your grant, which might be a form of an overstrength position in the current year. It might be a temp U if it's somebody you're just bringing in, part-time immediately to get the work done. Could be an intern or another form of part-time staff. If you immediate needs, another thing to look at is that oftentimes we'll have light duty workers available. This is somebody who might normally be an inspector, but twisted their ankle and can't walk for the next 4 weeks and is placed on modified duty. But maybe there's someone who can start working on the data entry for you, right? And that's a savings for the city to be able to repurpose their time to implementing your grant, as well as allowing you to get started on the work sooner, right? So just be talking to the employee services manager about, are there any creative strategies by which I can get people in faster to help do this work? That's something for you to be mindful of as grant manager.
Okay.
I wanted to go back to that last bullet
sure.
just because it segues, I think, well into what Sanjay's about to talk about. As we're creating new positions, we're doing that in concert on the budget side with creating VIS codes, as when we're setting up these either overstrength or newly budgeted positions, we're going to set them up to charge 2 VIS codes that are associated with your grant. So that's another kind of key complexity that we have to keep in mind when it comes to setting you up for success and being the grant manager. So with that, Sanjay's going to talk all about the world of what budget needs to do and why we need to be aware so we can effectively support you in reporting on your grant.
Okay. So you guys are probably seeing at this point that the reason this was created was because I have trauma and we are trying to effectively help our budget team not have to go through traumatic experiences. So I do hope, like, and there's a couple things that we've mentioned so far, Viz codes, appropriations, that maybe you're like, what are those words? And if that's the case, I will be covering them very briefly in my portion of the training, but also we have our recordings from our previous budget trainings from the last couple months. And you can reach out to Gabriella or me even, and we can get those videos for you, and you can learn about kind of the budget process, which is a huge part of the grant process. So just jumping in over here, the reality is that just because you get a check doesn't mean you can go spend stuff, right? Like the money that you receive from a granting agency is technically not the same money that you are going to use for that grant. It's actually two separate buckets of money, but they net each other out so that the city is not, as the terms of the grant, so the city's not getting charged, for those scope of services, and the grant agency is getting charged. So what we're talking about there is source and use. So those are the two words that I'm going to be using a lot today: source and use. And funds need to be appropriated every year according to the language of the grant, and the grant language will dictate how that process rolls out. And so money is going to come in on the source side from the granting agency, and that money needs to be budgeted. And then money is going to be expended on our end, and that money needs to be budgeted. Both monies need to be budgeted. So for example, let's just say general was expecting to have $1 million in sales tax and property tax that they expected to come in. And let's say that ESD's portion of that $1 million was $100,000. So that is what we were allocated for our fiscal year out of the whole totality of the portion of the general fund. Now let's say that you have a grant for $3 million, right? So that means that our little $100,000 portion of the general fund needs to be expanded to 3.1 or 3,100,000. So that is, and so the general fund actually expanded on the whole because we're going to need to like front that money essentially, right? Now the source that $3 million is coming in is not the sales tax and property tax that the normal general fund source funding is. It's that granting agency. So as much as the expenditure side needs to be budgeted, so the revenue side needs to be budgeted. And that's really why we as the budget team need to know way in advance what's happening with your grant. If you're looking into a grant, if you're going out, if you've gotten a NOFA, or even like if you're at the point where you actually receive like a notice of award, I would say that if you've received a notice of award and you haven't contacted us yet, please contact us at that point and just let us know exactly what's going on so we can kind of catch up. But we would love to be there for the whole process, understanding that you're wanting to go out for a grant, that you see an opportunity, you've identified an opportunity, you're talking with leadership, this is what it's going to look like, these are the expectations of the grant. We want to be part of those conversations. So funds need to be appropriated every year according to that language. And that's why we really want to be a part of this process so we can understand that language. For year one of a grant, there will need to be a submission and coordination with the budget office and budget team at the opportunity identified phase. So we need to know kind of the original scope of what the grant is saying. As the process goes forward, your budget analyst, administrative officer, and budget office liaison will support you in understanding the implications of applying for a grant. So each of your divisions has a specific division analyst, right? So IWM, the Integrated Waste Management, Monica Abundis is your division analyst. For the Regional Wastewater Facility, Jenna Zarbis is your division analyst. For each of our divisions, including Administrative Services, Beverly Owens is the budget analyst, the division analyst in charge. And so for each of your divisions, there is an analyst that has been put in charge of the budget for that division. So as your process goes on, you need to be communicating with your budget analyst about what you want to do, and then they will communicate to me and Kat, and we will all kind of be there, and Andrew, and I'll kind of be there to support you through this process. The budget office liaison we're talking about, so we as the budget team send our submissions into what's called the central budget office. So the same way that like HR has like a central HR in the city, or our fiscal team has like the finance department in the city, so the budget team has the budget office. And so we have a liaison within the budget office that works directly with ESD. And so we coordinate with them for these grant processes and for all of our budget processes. Between post-award and grant management phase, you will need to work with your budget analyst to create what's called an appropriation, or expand existing appropriations and viz codes to accommodate grant funds, both on the revenue side and expenditure side. So let me back up for a little bit over here. The way that money is received and expended within the city is through funds, appropriations, and viz codes. And those are basically different buckets, right? They're bigger buckets of funds. There's appropriations, which are specific budgets within the fund. And then there's viz codes, which are essentially the accounts where each of those budgets can have money allocated to. And within those viz codes, you have the identifiers for what the money is for. So I'm going to go to the next slide over here, and I will come back to this. Let me just show you the viz code first. So viz code, this is what a viz code looks like. It has the first 3 digits showing what fund the code belongs to. The second 2 digits identifying the department number. Our department is Department 76, the Environmental Service Department. You have the responsibility center, which is the program number, internal ESD program number. And then the next 5 numbers after the program number is the specific team within that program that is using those dollars, those monies. And then finally, you have the detail code at the end. Now, this is specifically what's called an expense viz code. And this is the viz code that you would use to pay invoices, to execute, like, different things that you want to procure for your grant services. There are also viz codes on the revenue side. And again, the viz codes live within appropriations, and appropriations live within funds. Different funds can have the same appropriation. So for example, our appropriation 0761 is our personal services appropriation. And in the general fund, you have appropriation 061. In Fund 423, which is the Integrated Waste Management Fund, you have appropriation 0761. In Fund 513, you have appropriation 061, so on and so forth, right? And so the viz codes live within the appropriations, and they identify the different programs that are being allocated monies in those appropriations. Revenue appropriations are a little different, where you have like an overall appropriation, like let's just say R100, and then you have the viz codes within those appropriations, and there's no specific like program that's identified with each of those viz codes. However, what we do when dealing with the grant is we create a specific revenue viz code tailored to your grant. And then we will like call it like the EPA 2023 to 2027 grant. And then that, and for forever, for as long as the grant is in effect, all the monies that are coming in from that grant will be as source, as revenue. It's not really revenue, it's just source funding. All the monies coming in from that grant will always be applied to that viz code. And so that's kind of what a viz code is and how it works. And so like when you send an invoice to be paid, you ask them to pay it using a specific viz code. And that last 4 digits over there, the detail code, tells the fiscal team what the purpose of the invoice is. So detail 4051 is computer and software purchases. Detail 4052 is professional and consultant services. Detail 4030 is supplies, so on and so forth. There's different details for different purposes. And so now I'm going to go back to our original slide over here. And so the council actions that we need to do and that you need to do when executing a grant, on the budget side of things, they need to happen during what's called budget cycles. And so there's different budget cycles throughout the year. We just submitted our annual report cycle. We are about to go into our base budget cycle. So annual report has 3 different functions on it. It's closing out last year, it is starting this year, and it's ratifying anything that went over budget. So that's our annual report cycle. And I'm not going to go into the technical details of it, but that is like one cycle. Our base budget cycle is actually looking at the base budget for 26-27 and saying, okay, so this is where our base budget is. Do we need to increase any of these buckets to be able to like better support our ongoing services in the future? And so we're already looking at fiscal year 26-27 when we do our base budget. So we're kind of living in 3 different years. We're living in 24-25, we're living in 25-26, and we're preparing for 26-27 all at the same time. And so when we execute agreements for grants, they happen within those budget cycles. So like right now, if we wanted to, we were going to go out for a grant that was going to start in July of 2026, then we would go through it like now at our base cycle or our proposed cycle to be able to set up all of the pieces necessary to be able to start paying invoices on July 1st. And so that's what we mean by saying that when we execute the budget side of this, we want to do it within the budget cycles that are happening. So so like right now, for example, if you had a grant that you knew about, a couple months ago, but never told us, and then all of a sudden you got an invoice for it, and now you have to pay it right now. It's like we're going to have a really hard time setting up appropriations and setting up viz codes and setting up, all these different things for you to be able to execute those functions. And a lot of times we'll probably get pushback. And what will happen is, in the worst case scenarios, we have to end up fronting money from other programs and basically hope that, based on the agreement of the grant, we'll get reimbursed in a timely fashion to be able to like reallocate, make those funds that were not allocated whole. That's the best case scenario, right? But best case scenario, you tell us right now for that grant that's, you're going to start paying invoices on in July 1st in 2026, and we can start, prepping for that right now. So that is again, a really high level. The bottom line, really when it comes down to it, is when you start identifying opportunities, talk to your budget analyst, include them in the conversation, and allow us to be able to support you as you go about figuring out the grant. Okay, grant management. So receipt and deposit of checks. So there's a couple different types of grants that we've talked about today. We've talked about lump sum grants. We've talked about reimbursement grants. Whenever we receive a check, again, what I was talking about, it goes into a specific viz code in a specific appropriation. And you need to realize that just because you have received the check doesn't mean that you can expend funds. Because what I was talking about is that we need to budget the revenue and we need to budget the expense. So the receipt and deposit of checks does not mean you automatically have those funds. If we planned correctly, and if we're doing everything correctly, the funds that you can spend will equal the amount of the funds that you receive. However, you can if we've done it correctly, you should be able to start spending regardless of like how much we have received in a given fiscal year based on the agreement that we will be receiving that before the year is done. So the receipt and deposit of checks is a really important reality that you need to recognize, that it is separate from the overall execution of spending money. Ongoing budgetary actions. For following years, you will need to work with your budget analyst to properly track revenue and expenditure within a given year, even for a multi-year grant. So your budget analyst will help set up trackers and will help set up financial technical pieces to allow you to kind of see from a monetary level what exactly is happening with your grant. And through that, you'll be able to kind of like rip and roll with the different waves that come your way. So let's just say, right, this last year, there was a question of whether the granting agencies would be able to continue in some of their grants. So, having that ongoing tracking of what's happening with your grant, how much money you've actually received, how much you're expecting to receive, how much you've actually spent. All of those pieces are really important to keep a very close eye on, so that in the case of an audit, or in the case of, like when you're finishing out the grant, to be able to prove that you were in compliance of the grant. For all those reasons, you want to stay very closely connected to the budget of your grant. Lump sum revenue and expenditures will need to be appropriated and tracked annually. So again, what lump sum is, it is a singular deposit from a granting agency that comes in at some point in the course of a year, but it's promised to happen within that year. And so you can be spending, like, let's just say that we were promised from Valley Water to receive a $200,000 check for these specific services. So we create the appropriation, we create the viz codes, we start, and then we adopt $200,000 in that appropriation for spending services. You can start spending that $200,000, right? As you can spend all of it by August if you want, and then you just stop those services. But that check may not come in until May. And that's okay, because we were promised that we were going to be given that check within the fiscal year. But what we need to do is make sure that we are very carefully tracking our expenditure to make sure that we don't go over, or if we go under, that we need to rebudget those funds into the next year to be able to continue the work. Because if we don't do that, what can happen is that revenue that we received, like, we will have to pay back in some versions of an agreement, where if we don't use all the funds of that lump sum that we received, that we're going to have to pay it back. And so we need to be able to rebudget those funds throughout the year. Because let's just say, you got that $200,000 adopted, and let's say you only use 50,000 of it, and you didn't rebudget the rest into the next year. That means the next year, that $150,000 that's not been appropriated into that year will have to, and then like Valley Water wants their payout back because we didn't use all of it. We will have to basically pay that out of our normal general fund budget, and that is a really big problem. And it's not something that we want to ever happen. And so if we do this carefully and correctly, it should be that we're able to move the money, the adopted money, throughout the years that the grant is in application. And then if there's anything left over, we can just take that adopted money and then pay it back to Valley Water, for example. So that's with lump sum. With reimbursement, revenue and expenditure will need to be appropriated and tracked quarterly throughout a given year, because every time you go out for reimbursement, you have to prove what expenses you've had thus far. And so in quarter one, you have to show all of those quarter one expenses, and then you go out and then you'll receive a revenue check back, or a reimbursement check back. You'll deposit on the revenue and you'll keep going. But you really need to ensure that you're tracking your expenditure and your revenue. So like, you want to also track how much you're receiving while you're going through the years at a quarterly basis. And again, both of these things are going to be worked through with your budget analyst. Your budget analyst is going to set up those trackers for you. They're going to set up those appropriations for you and those viz codes for you. All of that we'll do for you, but we need to understand what needs to be done before we can do it for you. And so that really is kind of the whole point of this portion of the training, is really to get you to realize what we're doing for you and what we want to do for you, but we need to know what it is that you want us to do. Expense report generation and regular meetings regarding expenditures. So that's something that we really kind of implemented this year. And I would, as the senior analyst, would like to see that keep going, where we actually set up meetings on a monthly or quarterly basis, depending on the grant, to meet with you, to talk about where we are, to talk about the different projects that you have coming up and the different expenses you have coming up, to look at the trackers together and to be able to say, okay, like, you got this much money already. However, you spent this much money. When do you expect to receive those reimbursements? So all of those pieces, or you've received, this lump sum and you've only expended this much, what's your plan? Do you expect to expend the rest of this money this year, or do we need to plan to rebudget in the next year? All those conversations need to be happening on a monthly or quarterly basis to kind of ensure that we are closely walking with you as the grant unfolds. Activity progress monitoring, again, that's kind of similar to what I've been saying already. It's going to vary based on each grant. So each grant will have different pressure points that we need to be able to address, like the one that we were talking about with the EPA, multi-department, multi-year reimbursement. That's a rough grant right there. And so it needs some very close progress monitoring to ensure that we end in compliance with the grant and not burdening any other programs with those expenses. And the question that we need to ask is, are we doing what we said we do? Like when we say that we're going to do this much work in a given year and then we don't do it and we need to rebudget those funds, are we saying that we can finish that work in the next year? Are we saying that we, sometimes when we get into a grant, we kind of realize we bit off more than we could chew. So if that is the case, we need to assess as we keep going, because that might lead to having us pay back the granting agency when, if we couldn't complete the work. And so are we saying what we said we do? Is our yes being yes and our no being no? And we need to really make sure that we are planning accordingly to address that question. Kat, did you want to jump in
I just
there?
wanted to add a little bit here, and we're, of course, we always go in with the best intentions of thinking we're going to be able to implement this program in partnership with this entity or this school or whatever, right? And something falls through and we're no longer able to do it. And, we're having to talk to our granting entity to say, hey, can we amend the terms of our contract to change who we're partnering with or to do less of the thing that we said we were going to do, right? Our contracts team can help you to an extent with that. It's mostly going to be you and your supervisor, who are talking to your contact at, the EPA or whoever it is that is giving you the grant to try to figure out, is there a workable solution? Whatever the case, you want to be keeping records of the activities that you have completed to date that are eligible for reimbursement under the terms of the agreement. Somebody dropped a question in the chat earlier, what happens, if there ever a situation where we haven't been paid? We want to set ourselves up to be able to say we did everything we could to execute what we said we were going to execute. Whatever reporting that was required of us, we did, any progress monitoring, site visits, taking pictures, keeping logs, whatever it might be, so that we can claim as much reimbursement for the city's investment and time that we can. There have been circumstances where we've had to break grant agreements. We really try not to do that, as it potentially hurts our standing as an entity when it comes to applying for future agreements. But just know that the city as a whole will try to fight to get as many of those dollars as we're eligible for when it comes to what's allowable within terms of the agreement for eligible reimbursable costs. City attorney would help with that in that case. But it really comes down to you as the grant manager, keeping those good records and good faith efforts of trying to execute what we said we were going to do, having, partnership agreements in place, having records of eligible activities and expenses, all of that really kept tight so that we're able to show that we did our due diligence in trying to execute the scope that we committed to. So I just wanted to give a general note there.
Thanks, Kat. All right, going on. Finally, record retention is a big part of grant management. We want to make sure that we are, according to the needs of the grant, which will be stated out in most grant agreements, that we are keeping a close track of everything that's happened, and be able to kind of state plainly if we ever are audited or questioned about the grant from the agency. So this is kind of a couple examples of different record retention requirements that can happen through an agency. And I want to make a note here as well that we have this PowerPoint has been created as a guide for you. And so you can literally save this. Gabriella sent it out when she sent out the invite. You could literally save this and then just pop it open the next time you're going for a grant. And it should be able to walk you through step by step. There's been a lot of information in here, and I really commend you guys for hanging with us through this training. It's a very heavy, very technical training, but the PowerPoint specifically has been created to really be a guide and a map for you going forward. Okay, so we are going to actually split up into breakout rooms right now and do a quick activity. It's only like 3 questions, but it's a little interactive. And so I'm going to break us up. It was sent out to you through Gabriella. If you don't have it, please feel free to ping me and I can send it to you directly. It should be a lot of fun. And then I'll bring us back in about, oh man, we're getting late over here. About 10
Like
minutes.
6 minutes. 6 minutes is
Yeah.
probably good. Yeah.
Okay, 6 minutes. And we will work through it together. So I'm going to stop the recording.